I want to welcome everybody to the 2019 Town Information Meeting. And we are being broadcast live on BCTV. And I just want to let people know that it is being interpreted by our ASL interpreters, but they will not be seeing it live this evening. There was a technical glitch. But anyone who needs the ASL interpreter when this broadcast is restreamed or on television, you will be able to see it. So we hope you will tune in, and thanks for bearing with us. My name is April Hunter. I'm chair of the Brattleboro Selectboard, and I want to introduce the other people at the table. We have Tim Wessel, who is the clerk of the board, Randy Starr, who is the vice chair, Dave Scholes, who is a member. We also have Bob Fisher, who is our town attorney, and Peter Elwell, who is the town manager. Along the back is a lot of the department heads and other town staff, so I think we have anybody who works in town government pretty much here tonight. The purpose of tonight's meeting, and before I actually say that, is there anyone here who's first time town meeting rep?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Thank you and welcome. The purpose of tonight's meeting is, as it's called an informational meeting, is for us to give you information about things that are to be talked about at town meeting. It's not a time for debates, it's not a time for motions, it's not a time for votes. We want to save the real fun stuff for actual town meeting. And if I appear mean, or if any of my fellow board members appear mean and cut you off, please don't hold it against us. We just want to make sure that the good points that you're going to make is actually made on the day that the debates and the votes and the motions will be made. So what we're going to do first is go through the budget. We'll go through a summary of the budget, and there will be time. What we'll do is go through first the revenues, and then we'll take a break and have people ask any questions that you'd like. Then we'll go through the expenditures. What I'm going to do is make sure that I know what page we're on in the big green book, so you're not looking wondering where we are. And if you do ask any questions, please just, if you're looking at a certain page, also remember that there's a big book and you can get time to use it for everybody. And if at any time somebody can't hear me, just yell out. We have to get very close to the mic, so if I stray, please let me know. What I'm going to start on is page 77. That is the summary of the revenues, and anybody is looking for the full budget, it starts on page 79, but I'm going to be looking at page 77 to start with. This budget, we worked, I don't know, we had 10 or 12 meetings to put the budget together. The town staff did a great job presenting the information to us, and I think we feel confident as the town staff and as a board presenting this to you this evening. The budget that we are proposing has revenues and expenditures equaling $17,914,897. That's a $158,982 increase from the FY19 budget. That increase is an increase of 3.44 cents over FY19, and that, if you're calculating what your taxes would be, that's a $34.40 increase for every $100,000 of your property value. Property taxes that account for the revenues that we have equals $15,198,202. And property taxes take up account for 85% of our revenue in this town. I'm going to start right from the top and just talk about property taxes, and we'll go through the downtown district, which is an $80,000 appropriation I don't know how many of you are aware that we have a designated downtown, and because of that, there's a special assessment for only downtown property owners, so this is not a tax on anyone in the town. And there is a downtown organization, downtown Brattleboro Alliance, that puts a budget together, and this year they requested $80,000. Rooms and meals tax in the town of Brattleboro, we are able to collect 1% over what the state takes, and we are estimating, or town staff is estimating, that that would be about $420,000 of revenue this year. It's gone up sort of exponentially, so we're hoping that it's worth $420 this year. Payment in lieu of taxes is $160,000 that we receive. If you go to penalties and interest, these are when, let's say, bad people don't pay on time. These are the kind of things where we get this from finance, listers, and police. Fee for services. These are fees that we pay whether, licenses and kind of thing, when you go in and record things at the town clerk's office. So those are what they are. The one I want to point out is the fire, $83,000. It has an increase of $63,000. People are following where I am. This year, there was a proposal made to the select board by the town health officer, who is assistant fire chief, to do a better job of inspecting apartment buildings in town. The ordinance has not passed yet, that'll be up to the next select board. But the income from this would be a $75 fee that would be assessed on each apartment building that the landlords, each apartment unit, I'm sorry, that would be assessed every 4 years on the landlord. The anticipated income from that is about just over $60,000. So that's why that number has gone up. And that number will go away, obviously, if the select board does not pass that ordinance. And we're going to get to the expenditures, and there's even an expenditure line for that too. So basically, it evens out, that's not coming from property taxes. The town manager corrected me, it's $56,250 of revenue that we anticipate from that. Police, Parks and Rec. Then we go to license and permits, which are pretty self-explanatory. $50,000 up finance, town clerks $30,500, planning is $50,000. Then we get to the others. Governmental, and I want to list what those are because everybody says what are those. Governmental equals $395,000. 5,000 of that is railroad revenue sharing, which the town manager can tell us more about if you have a question. State road construction money, it's money we get from the state for our highways, is $230,000. And current use payment equals $160,000. So that's what makes up the $395,000 under the governmental line item. The fund balance, that is our surplus money. And this year we are proposing using $337,119 from our surplus. What we want to use it for is taking $295,000 of it and transferring it to our capital budget. And this is this number, the 295, is actually part of Article 13, where we outline where we want to use this 295. So this is going to be a separate article as well. 25,000 of that is replacing windows in the children's room at the library. They're very weak $170,000 is for a new dump truck for the Public Works Department. So that makes up the $295,000. The other $42,119 is actually Article 14, and that is the promotional money that's being asked for by the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance. So those are the items that make up that $337,119 that we're asking to come out of the surplus. I'm going to have a surplus explanation that I think is something that everybody else can do. But just so I don't know how many people know how we come up with the number that we use for our surplus. In the current surplus, there's $2,077,299. And there has been a guideline in our town that we keep 10% of our operating budget in the surplus funds, and that equals $1,791,849. So if you subtract the $1,791,849 from $2,077,299, you get $285,809. So that is what we use our 10% guideline. That's what we would use. Obviously, we are recommending $337,119. So we're going over that 10%. That brings us now to 9.7%, keeping it in. But we feel that these are the things to go on. It's worth going below 9.7 and it's part of 10%. If anybody has any questions about that, when we get to the question, please ask because it can get confusing. Transfers, you'll see it's $330,000. That's money that we're getting back into the general fund from the parking fund and the utility fund. What happens is there are expenses, administrative expenses, whether it's accounting, dispatch, legal services, that are actually done on behalf of the parking fund and on behalf of the utility fund. So those expenses are sort of billed back to the general fund, if that makes sense. So we're taking parking and utility fund money, putting it back into the general fund for services that general fund expenses that these two funds, if that makes sense. So that makes up the $330,000 in the transfer. Miscellaneous. I asked the town manager, what's miscellaneous? And he gave me some examples of what miscellaneous is. This and book replacement of books at the library, upfit reimbursement of the police department.
From the reformer and rentals.
Yeah. Bike registrations and Parks and Rec revenue, which people donated to Senior Center. Oh, yeah. And the largest one is investment income. If people remember last year, we took $5 million and moved it into a interest-bearing account, which has going well for us because FY19 we've got about $42,000 worth of interest this year.
It's okay, keep going.
Thank you, Amy. You're welcome. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Investment income this year is $100,000. And as I was saying, last year we took $5 million into an interest-bearing account. We received $22,000 last year. This year it's estimated to be $100,000. So that's $58,000 extra. So again, our revenues total $17,914,897, and that's $158,982 that's the revenue budget summary. It's literally a summary. So if anybody has any questions about anything in the revenue department, we are happy to take them now. Yes, yeah. Well, start, and what we'd ask is to come up to the microphone and tell us who you are.
Okay, where is
Oh, right here. Because you're on live on CCTV.
Yeah, I know what I'm doing. My question is on the in lieu of taxes. I was looking through the book to see, I think the retreat is one of them, and others. My comment is, let's renegotiate some of it.
No idea. We wish we could. Are there any other questions on the revenue side? Yeah, come on up.
Does rooms and meals taxes include taxes from beds and breakfast?
It does now. The state has required Airbnb, they have an arrangement with Airbnb, that Airbnb automatically collects the taxes from anybody who's on their platform. And right now, other Airbnbs are supposed to be paying the taxes. Oh yeah, rooms, meals, and alcohol. But yes, Airbnb. But the question is, yes, Airbnb, at least from the platform, we know we're getting it, and other places are supposed to. But I actually checked with the tax department to make sure that that was so, and they said it was. That's Chris.
I have a question about when we would start seeing the fruits of 1% local option sales tax, if that were to pass. When would that go into effect? When would they cash in the books that you expect?
If that is approved, it'll go into effect on July 1st, and so the revenue would apply to this fiscal year, the budget that you'll be considering at town meeting.
Are there any other questions about the revenue? Seeing that, we'll move on to page 78, which are expenses. Actually, I go back to 77. Sorry. I missed the whole one. You'll see, we'll start with department salaries, and I won't go through all of them, but the one I want to point out to you is facility maintenance, and you'll see $137,997, which you've never seen before. That is for salaries and overtime for maintenance staff. It used to be broken down by each department, but now they work as sort of their own little department unit. So all of the overtime and salary costs are dropped into this line item. There are other contracts, maintenance contracts or supplies that are still within the departments, but it's the salaries and overtime that is at $137,000. So in essence, that's not a new expenditure, it's just an expenditure that's come out of other budgets or other department budgets and plopped into here. So that's really not an increase, it's just another way of accounting for it going forward. So I'm not going to read through them all. If anyone has a question, feel free to ask. And as you can see, that's $7,286,132 is what we pay for salaries and department heads. And that's the top of page 78. You'll see that. Oh, I'm sorry, all employees. For our department staff, is what I meant to say. Then we have employee benefits, and as you're going to know when you look at this, this is one of the reasons that we have increased this year. I'll make note of the health insurance. As you can see, it is up to $1,616,086. That's an increase from FY19 of $184,781. You can also see the HRA expense has gone up to $279,125, which is an increase of $46,500. $565. And I'm sure there'll probably be a question about that and how the town manager addressed why that happened. But those are employee benefits equal $3,286,711, and that's an increase of $233,771. And again, as you know, that's mostly because of health insurance, and I'll have the town manager, if you want to address that right now.
Sure.
While we're there, you can.
So I'll point out one additional line that's relevant to the explanation I'm about to offer, which is the opt-out HSA line. The HSA portion of that, the health savings account, was created about 7 years ago as an employee benefit when the town switched from a more traditional health insurance program to a high deductible health insurance program. So the town created at that time a health savings account benefit and contributes money to employees depending on whether they're in single coverage or in family coverage is a differential amount. But basically the benefit is provided at the beginning of the year to pay a portion of the deductible, since it's a high deductible plan, that is paid by the employees and their families. At that time, the HSA and the amount paid by the households paid everything up to the deductible with Blue Cross. And then regular insurance kicked in after the deductible. About 3 years ago, we created what's called a health reimbursement arrangement, the HRA. We did that in order to stabilize the health insurance premiums because the town had some experience in prior years with significant increases in the cost of the health insurance. And by basically self-insuring a layer and having the town pay bills, taking the deductible level to a higher level than what it already was, but maintaining the same exposure for employees and our families, the town picked up a layer in between that employee exposure and the new deductible. By doing that, we achieved a savings, a fairly significant savings, in the premium cost with Blue Cross. And because not every employee penetrates the HRA layer or uses up much of the HRA layer, there's actually an overall cost savings for the town by switching into that partial self-insurance. That worked really well for the first couple of years of that program. In fact, on 2 separate occasions, we implemented it, and then on 2 separate occasions actually increased the HRA layer. The first time fairly significantly, the second time just a little. In order to maximize each year at the time of the renewal of the health insurance, we were looking at what would happen to the premiums if we took on a certain amount of additional risk, and we tried to find the sweet spot where we were not exposing the town to the potential that we might actually incur far greater expenses because of the self-insurance portion, but to bring down the premium as much as possible for the Blue Cross coverage. This year, what we found, because of a variety of circumstances, the fact that we now have a mature HRA, we've kind of achieved the savings that's available by doing that partial self-insurance. And unless you have an insurance reserve that's very substantial, you can't really take on more risk than you can afford to handle in a particular fiscal year, and that's our circumstance. And so we've about maxed out what we can do with the HRA layer in terms of just prudent use of it. But also in looking at the various quotes that we got from Blue Cross for different levels of coverage, depending on how we might have changed the deductible again this year, there was really no more room with that HRA. So we weren't going to get additional benefit from Blue Cross for taking on additional risk, so there's no reason to take on additional risk. But the problem was that all of the different quotes we got from Blue Cross were extremely high. They're extremely high because we're a relatively small group in terms of a pooling of insurance risk. And this past year, we had some significant claims within the group. We had more claims than usual, and we had a handful of very serious claims of health issues and injuries that had to be addressed. And so the cumulative impact of that was the first quote from Blue Cross was an increase of more than 17%. we were actually able to work with Blue Cross and take on just a little bit more risk in the HRA to get the overall increase down to 12.9, but it's still a very high increase. This health insurance increase is the single most challenging aspect of the budget that we dealt with this year. So we're taking a fresh look at ways in which we might manage this as we go forward, and hopefully coming up with something that might be a creative solution, like when we implemented the HRA in the first instance 3 years ago. But for this year, we need to provide the benefit that's been promised, and it's an increase that is being driven primarily because we got much more value. The employees and our families this past year used the service to a greater degree than we do in a normal year, and so actuarially, we're having to pay a significant increase this year.
Thank you. Next is department expenses, and again, I won't read through all of these, but these are expenses other than salaries that the departments incur. If anybody has any questions, we will deeper down into that as well. Then you go to the next subject, which is general, which totals $612,854. The first one in that line is general services, and just to give you folks an example of what that means, there's a full list of what it is on page 85, but to give you an idea of what the general services are, select board salaries, which equals $17,000, conferences and other management expenses, which is $20,000, our town computer equipment and maintenance, which is $60,000, GSI mapping, which is $19,000, auditing, to pay our auditors is $20,000, and tax abatement is $15,000. But again, the full list is on page 85. I thought people would want to say what the general means. Next up is the municipal center, and that expense is $91,360. And that's on page 91, if anyone wants to look, but examples of what that is the fuel cost for the building is $25,960. The electric is $25,200. Money set aside for building repairs is $15,000. Maintenance supplies, $6,000, and maintenance contracts, $10,200. So basically expenses to maintain the municipal center. Next is debt and debt service, and that's $1,471,325. And that is payments that we make on the bonds that the town has taken out. And you see an increase of about $31,000 this year, and that is because of the first payment that we made on the aerial ladder truck that we purchased last year. Risk is $245,000, and there's an increase in $97,200. Risk includes property, liability, workers' comp insurance, and again, if anyone has any questions, we'll get question time, the town manager can tell us all that now. Next is the human services budget, and that's at $147,300. And the full list of human service agencies that the Human Services Committee is recommending is actually in Article 17. It is $1,300 more over the FY19 appropriation that we made. And for those of you who don't know, there is a town meeting representative human services committee that vets the applications that come in for people or nonprofit organizations in town that want to get some money. And so it's not, a select board doesn't do this, it's members of the town meeting representatives that actually vet the applications and survey the allocations. And you can see, again, that full list is Article 17, and they requested an increase of $1,300 this year. And auxiliary services are at $497,919. The full list of what that is on page 88, but I'll just read some of them for you. Street lights, $140,000. Civil defense, $2,500. Our local bus service, we paid a current $50,000. Ambulance service, the town pays Rescue Inc. $250,000. There's a new expenditure this year that's under auxiliary services, which is $5,000 to BCTV. That was a request made by BCTV. I don't know if you've all heard that Federal Communication Commission is thinking about their rulemaking process, which in essence will make it so that local stations like BCTV do not get the little tax that you always see in their Comcast bill. So BCTV asked us for an appropriation of $5,000 because if they don't get the money, they need operating funds. So that is a new line item, a new line in the auxiliary services line item. The museum, we have $7,000 for the museum. We always give them that for maintenance that they need. The West River watershed, $1,000. That was approved last year by town meeting, so it's back in. Green Up Day, $300. And the promotion and marketing for the Chamber of Commerce and the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance, which is also Article 14, with the $42,119. It's also under auxiliary services. So if you can see by the list that I just read, auxiliary services is pretty much a catch-all for something that doesn't fit anywhere else. Wooded Regional Commission, $27,500. The town just added for the services that they do. Our county tax is $85,000. The downtown program is $80,000. We talked about that when we were talking about the other side. That once again is the money from the special assessment that is assessed, special tax that is assessed on downtown property owners. So that's not, that does not come from the general population property taxes. So that goes to the downtown Brattleboro Alliance, the downtown activities. Then we have to capital. We are proposing to use $1,295,000 for capital projects and equipment this year. The full list of what we want to do is actually on page 99. We are proposing $800,000 in projects and another $495,000 in equipment. We have some trim work at the library, which is $55,000. The windows in the library, $25,000. Street paving, $300,000. Sidewalk repair and replacement is $70,000. The pool renovations, which I talked about, at $100,000. And then there's $250,000 for a Union Station down at the Amtrak station at the museum. There needs to be some ADA improvements down there that we have to make. The U.S. Justice Department is requesting that we make these improvements. So we put $250,000 in right now. That may not have to be expended by the town. There's some things going on with the Amtrak, so we don't know if that's a sure bet for us, but we need to put it in just because we have to make those improvements. We're really required to do that. So that adds up to $800,000 on capital projects. The $495,000 that we're proposing spending on vehicles includes 2 patrol vehicles for the police department, guns and holsters at $35,000 for the police department, ballistic vests for the police department at $12,000, booking and fingerprint scanner for the police department at $25,000, for the Department of Public Works pickup truck at $46,000. truck of $46,500. For Parks and Recs, zero-turn mower at $18,000. For the fire department, $10,000 expenditure for our thermal imaging camera. And for general services, the computer hardware at $31,000. So that's $495,000 for the vehicles and equipment, and $800,000 for the projects, which equals $1,295,000 for closing fees on capital expenses. We have to make a transfer to our solid waste budget of $510,000, and that's $40,000 more than last year. The reason we have to transfer general fund dollars into the solid waste fund is a good reason. People are composting and recycling more, which means we're not making as much bag revenue as we used to or we anticipate. So it's a good thing that we are lowering our bag usage. We're not throwing away, but it leaves a hole, obviously, in the solid waste budget, so we transfer from the general fund. All of that equals $17,914,897, which is an increase of $158,982. And as you see, the revenues and expenses balance out. So does anyone have any questions about the expenses? Yes. I think Mr. Carter will answer.
Footnote this week. Pages 77 and 78, just a quick question. I see the income on 77 for the planning department is down 7%, which suggests fewer building permits, less work there. But on the next page, we see that the planning department's expenses have doubled. So these two things seem counterintuitive.
There's actually a really good explanation for it, and I'll let the town manager explain it.
If you look at the planning department's line item on the bottom of page 77 under salaries, it's a reduction of $42,792, or 21% of the salaries being reduced. And then the point you made is quite right, that the department expense line item for planning is increasing by $23,200, which is doubling. What we've done there is reduced a 4-person staff to 3, and we're going to contract for some of the services that have been provided by that 4th position, but it's overall a net savings to the town to accomplish the same work that needs to be done.
Does that make sense?
My name is Kurt Dimes, I live in District 2. I hope we don't have to read every item in the budget because there's little time for all the other things, all the other articles which are to be considered. And I particularly am interested in the self-governance. I'd like to hear from Peter about that, about the self-governance pilot program. And I think a lot of people are very interested in that and in the significance of the null and void school budget being on our agenda. So I'd love to hear about that from David or from Andy.
We're in trouble.
But am I right that we can ask questions about anything?
What?
Not really. We're trying to keep it, and David can tell you there is an informational meeting on them.
Yeah, 2 weeks, I think, did we get the 20th? Here, on the 20th. No, actually, we're going to be in Green Street. The school district will be presenting our budget. We're going to take 2 paths. We're going to behave as if the merger is going to be delayed and approve that, or have that budget voted. And at the same time, we're moving forward with creating the new district and getting the people elected and getting a budget prepared for that. So that we've got money to spend on June 1st, or July 1st when it becomes due. So town meeting will be, and the town meeting will have a very full conversation about that.
Will we be debating on it and then saying, oh, it's null and void, like seems to be listed in the book?
No, we don't get to say whether it's null or void. The court, the state of Vermont gets to say that.
Okay. And about asking questions, This meeting is for asking questions about any article on the RTM ballot, am I
That
right?
is correct.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Does anyone have any questions about the expenditures?
I'd like to hear about the pilot program from Peter.
Yeah, we want to get the budget stuff done first, and then we'll move on to the other things. So we're talking about expenditures. I'm sorry, I have to explain. Answer with that.
Sorry, it's actually an income question. I was curious about where the $5 million is being invested, and if there's any report on sort of what that money's going towards.
Oh,
So,
the money we put into the $5 million?
yeah, where and how it's being invested and what kind of, I guess,
Sure.
pieces.
So it's not like, excuse me, it's not like in equity investing or that sort of thing where you're picking and choosing investments. It's actually invested savings and loan in a fully insured, collateralized account. It's just that by putting in the amount of money that we did and into the particular place in the array of options within the savings and loan, we're able to get a larger interest rate than the very little bit we were getting on where it was before.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
I saw another person.
Yeah.
I actually wanted to just ask the same question. I was just
Oh.
curious.
Microphone.
Oh, yeah. Nobody can hear you in TV land.
Thank you. First time.
Yeah, and if people could tell us who you are.
Thank you. Andrea Andrews, District 2. Thank you for your heads up. It's my first time. I was curious about the doubling rate of the investment, and perhaps she asked that question and you answered it with the amount that you're able to receive in the investment amount.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
I was curious about the inspiration for investing double the amount, and perhaps you just answered that?
Yeah, so it actually was something that was a recommendation from the finance department, who saw the opportunity as interest rates started to increase, saw the opportunity to actually take some money. We have enough of a total balance, not just of the general fund balance, which Kate referred to earlier, but other balances that are commingled among town funds. We had enough money that we would keep enough money in the sort of daily liquid fund and be able to put some other money away into something that earns more, but is still fully collateralized in a safe place.
So it was advised, it wasn't like...
So it wasn't putting more money into investment, it was putting some of what we already got invested in a better place to earn more interest.
Yes, thank you.
Daniel Quick, District 2. It's a kind of fanciful question, I guess, in a way. You know, I'm thinking about like creative solutions to our health insurance issues, and I was curious about like whether group size affects rate, and whether there are like creative solutions to increasing group size, like banding together with other towns in the state, or a Brattleboro group where all the residents of Brattleboro.
You know what? That's a really good question for the next select board.
I'll ask you that. You should not answer it all. You
Hi, I'm Ricky for District 2.
Wait, one sec. Peter's gonna answer the question. Hold on, give one sec.
So one quick answer for the benefit of the body. Within the work that we're doing, we are working with a representative from Richard's group to actually get some expert advice about things we wouldn't otherwise know about. And that topic of, you know, is it possible to pool with others has come up. Right now, it's not the front burner option, but we're looking at multiple options, and we will exhaust that one more fully before we make a recommendation.
What is the name of the insurance group used for the risk insurance?
For that, we actually are in a larger pool together with the other municipalities of the state. It's an organization called PASSIVE, the Property and Casualty Intermunicipal Fund, and it's provided by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns to provide a pooling of risk among Vermont's municipalities.
And so I would appreciate the civil defense budget not being included in the auxiliary services, but to have its own itemized account. What is the over $100,000 mentioned being used for in civil defense?
Civil defense. No, civil defense $2,500. It's under auxiliary services, page 88. See that? If you go to page 88, under auxiliary services, it's right under street lights, it's the second line.
So what is the $2,279 for civil defense being spent on?
Primarily training and occasionally small items of equipment.
And what is the current value of the police artillery?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm not sure that the chief would know the answer to the valuation of it.
Because I've been asking questions about the $35,000 gun proposed budget, and I still haven't been responded to with an answer about what the decommissioned guns, that the $35,000 worth of new guns, where they would be sent to, or how they would be used. And there should be accountability to be responsible for answering that.
The chief is here, so maybe that's a question we can get answered, not right now, because of, but we can get that question.
Why not right now?
Well, I don't know.
It's an expenditure-related question that the public deserves to know.
Can you, I don't know if the chief is ready, can you answer that question tonight?
I honestly didn't hear it. What was the question?
To repeat the question was, what is the current value of the police artillery?
Artillery?
Yes.
Zero.
Arsenal?
The weapons, the guns?
Not just the guns, but can you itemize between the guns and the rest of the weapons, the value?
Not off the top of my head. I can discuss.
Well, you could talk to the mic so that people, because don't people at home have to.
Perfectly, thanks very much. Can you answer the question of what happens to old guns when you're no longer using them? Yeah.
Basically what we do is we contact various dealers, and we have a trade-in value that goes towards the purchase of the new weapons. So they're old, they're 10 years old. I can say the last time we did a trade-in value, we got approximately $150 per sidearm that we traded in, and that went to the purchase of the new weapons.
Does that help a little bit, Ricky?
Because one of the notes I had seen earlier was that the quote for $35,000 was for 35 new guns, so that would be $1,000 a gun. So but you're saying that you're doing a trade-in with dealers for $150 for the old guns that you're putting towards the $1,000 for the new guns. So those dealers, do you know if there's any contract application for those guns to stay in country, or do you know if they ship them out of country?
No, I have no authority to regulate what they do with their weapons. They are licensed federal arms dealers, so they fall under federal regulations.
And I don't want us to get too off topic about the budget item.
Well, this is very on point and on topic. So if you could get back to make a public statement about what the current police artillery value is, that would be appreciated. So reps should really, not just reps, but residents in our communities, we should really consider how much in weapons are being invested in, especially when private usage is being more restricted. Private gun ownership is being more restricted. So why isn't federal gun ownership also being not as restricted? That seems an equal power. Those are my main questions.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about the expenditure in our FY20 proposed budget? There's a couple more budget-related things that I want to bring up to everybody. There's some expenditures that are actually in warning that are not included in our final budget. And there are 3 of them. One is Article 18, which is a $4,000 proposed appropriation to his place, and Article 19, which is a $12,200 proposed appropriation to the visiting nurses of Vermont, New Hampshire.
Page number, please?
It is
17.
Yeah, page 7. Or 8, I'm sorry. 18 and 19. Article 18 and 19. And last year, those were included in the human services budget. This year, they are separate. Both organizations missed the deadline to submit their applications to the Human Services Committee. So the Human Services Committee denied their applications because they were late. These 2 organizations came to the select board and asked to be put on the warning. So those are why those 2 are separate and not included in the budget. Also, Article 20, which is also on page 8, which is the $10,000 for climate protection. That is not in the budget, but it is a separate article, and that's how it's included, always been separate. Right, yeah, it's been always been a separate article, and it's also been included in the budget for this year. So those are 3 expenditure items that do not appear in the budget that we just went over, but do appear as articles. There are also 2 separate articles that are not in the budget, but have no impact on property taxes. The first one is Article 22, which is on page 8, and that is the SEVEDS, which is Southeastern Vermont Economic Development Strategies, who came and asked to be put on the town warrant. And they're making a recommendation of giving them $25,000. That money does not come from property taxes or from the general fund. It comes from the town's revolving loan fund, which is program income that we receive from community development block grants, money that comes from the state, and we loan to either housing or economic development projects, where the money is paid back and get to keep it in our revolving loan fund. So we're recommending $25,000 really set as for that, but again, there's no impact on the property taxes. The second is Article 10 on page 7. And this is the closing out of the police fire facilities fund. As you all know, we borrowed some money to make the new police and fire stations. There is some money left in the bond, and there are some recommendations in Article 10 on how to spend the rest of the money and how to close out that bond. Again, that has no impact on the property taxes because that is money that we have borrowed and is sitting there waiting for us to spend if town meeting chooses to. So those are 2 things that are separate articles, but are not in the budget and have no impact on the property taxes. So I don't know if anybody has any questions about any of those.
Hi, Oscar Heller, District 3. My question is about Article 10, sort of generally, if some of that bond money is unspent, what happens to it? Thank you.
So, if there are funds that remain unspent and the body does not authorize the final piece of our recommendation under that item, which is to transfer the balance of that fund over into the capital fund, so that in future years, select boards can recommend and representative town meeting can decide on other capital investments, either projects or equipment to spend those funds on. If neither thing happens, if it's not authorized for something specific this year, and it's not authorized to be transferred over into the capital fund, then it would simply remain in the police fire bond fund to be spent on future expenses at those facilities.
So quick follow-up question. So hypothetically, for example, if the $150,000 was not spent on the carport, it could go into the town capital fund and be used for other projects?
That's correct.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on those items? All right, seeing none, I'm going to answer Kurt Diamond's question on Article 23. And it's to see if the legislature, or the town is going to select board and expressing support for the Vermont cities and towns and state, proposal of the state legislature to create a limited self-governance pilot program. What that is all about, and I have to give Dave Gartenstein, our former select board chair, credit for pushing us on the regional hub issue. We've had many discussions about how can the town of Brattleboro raise more revenue. And Peter has been working with similar towns, town managers and similar towns. And at the same time, the Vermont League of Cities and Towns has put a proposal to the legislature that would allow certain municipalities, it's like a pilot project, to collect fees or do other things that right now we can't do because we're a Dillon's rule state, which means we can only do things that the town and the state permits us to do. Not a home rule state where we can do things that we're only prohibited from doing. So what we did as a select board is we have supported that legislation. Hopefully it gives towns a little bit more flexibility to do more than we can do now. Supporting the legislation as a select board did, and if town meeting approves this, does not mean Brattleboro is automatically going to be one of the municipalities selected. It is a pilot project. But that's why I'm not supposed to get into why we're doing what we're doing, but that's what this Article 23 is about, seeing whether the town wants to support the legislation that's currently being proposed a month later. Yeah. Don't go advocate.
I'm not going to advocate. One quick sort of clarification on what Kate just said. All of that was correct. I wanted to make sure that you knew that on the question of whether or not Brattleboro would be able to participate in the pilot project if the legislature approves that there be a pilot project, that would become a separate question for a future town meeting. The legislation has been written in a way that any town that wants to participate in the pilot project would have to submit a proposal to the state, and the way in which a town would be authorized locally to submit such a proposal is by its town meeting approving the, an application to file.
Peter, is the self-governance which may be conferred on us limited only to matters of taxation?
Well, the bill is still being worked on. It's looking promising in the Senate, and we hope that the Senate will complete its work within the next couple of weeks and send it over to the House. In its current condition in the Senate, it would certainly be broader than just for revenue raising. It would actually offer the opportunity to provide services also that in a more efficient manner in many cases, and to provide services that we're actually not allowed to provide in some cases. So I know that's kind of vague right now. In an advocacy context, we can have a more detailed conversation about the kinds of things that we think would be very valuable for the town to be able to exercise some self-governance authority over, and why we think that, at least more broadly for the question that's before this year's meeting, why it's important for municipalities to support having the legislature allow a pilot project.
Can you name one thing besides taxation which we might be concerned to legislate?
Yeah, the stop sign. I think what we don't want to do, Kurt, is go down this path where we're not talking about this at town meetings, so I just want to be really careful. I mean, if you can think of one thing.
Sure, well, so I'll say three really fast. Parking, traffic transportation related issues, and code enforcement issues. In all three of those areas, there are structural inefficiencies built into what the state requires municipalities to do just to be responsive to community concerns. And so we're eager for some flexibility there.
Thank you so much.
Yes. Garner.
Orion Barber, District 1, it occurs to me that we're going to have a whole bunch of state reps around here on town meeting day. And if we have questions about what this legislation is going to look like, those are the people who ask.
Thank you. Yeah, they're town reps, some of them are town meeting reps that will be here.
Yep.
And they are, the town manager just told me to be sponsored of the legislation, so good point. Yeah. I saw another hand somewhere, yeah.
Hello, HB Lizito, District 2. This is maybe an open meeting law question. I've been receiving a lot more email this year as a town rep than ever I can remember in years past, and I know we've talked about this at various times. I'm curious about open meeting laws, and is it because we're all BCC'd, and can you provide some clarity? Would be great.
Our town attorney is ready.
I thought he might be.
Thank you. We do want to be careful with regard to discussion. Once that, as I understand it, these emails were positions that were taken and sent out. But what we don't want to do is then have a discussion of more than a quorum of the public body, which then gets us into having an unwarned public, or supposed to be a warned public meeting. So to the extent, I think that's why that was done as the BCC, so there cannot be the reply all. But same cautionary tale that I gave last year, we don't want to get into discussing through mediums like Facebook and the like.
So I guess a follow-up question, since the entire list is public, I wouldn't have to reply all to that email, but I could grab the entire list and make a new email. Am I correct that I could not respond with thoughts to a position that's been taken, or I could? I've been not responding at all because I don't think I should, but I don't know.
I think if you hit reply, because the blind copy, the reply is one-on-one slot. But there's nothing wrong with any person in a body giving his or her position with regard to an article or anything that's up for town meeting. But what you don't want to do is be discussing that. So when it falls into the discussion, that's when there's the problem of potentially violating open meeting law. This gets into the very gray area with our modern technology, and we admit that. I don't think we have a great resolution, either statewide or locally, for that. So that's why I say proceed with caution with regard to that.
Thank you.
The rule we have on the select board is do not reply all. I see a hand.
Yeah, Bob over here, District 1. Just to clarify, there's been a non-BCC sort of email. I've got like 4 or 5 of them. So, yes, I think the question was seeking some sort of best practice.
I would agree with this.
Right, I think it's the same, yeah, it's the same that we do, just don't reply all. You know, if you want to reply to that one person who sent it, but don't hit, the minute you hit reply all and start having a conversation about it, is when you get into the murkiness.
Save it all for a week from Saturday.
That's really the same on the floor.
Thanks, I'll just identify myself as Chris Chapman. On the matter of the 1% sales tax, can you help me understand, if it passes and we start collecting a tax, what happens to that money when it comes in? We haven't budgeted for it. We, as a select board, hasn't budgeted for it. So then what happens? Is it money that's just not spent this year and then spent or budgeted next year? Or, well, if you could just walk us through what happens with that revenue in the plan that happens. It'd be helpful to clarify.
Sure. That item will be addressed by representative town meeting prior to when you address the budget article. And so, and forgive me, there's a sort of arcane piece of this I have to say to make sure that you understand sort of the fullness of it. But first I'm going to oversimplify and say you'll be able to take into account the decision that you've made regarding the 1% local option tax when you're making a decision about the FY20 budget. But having said that, the arcane but very important piece about your action on the budget is you as a body have the authority to decide what the total budget is going to be. And you authorize the taxation that is then levied in order to collect enough funds to provide all the services that are provided through the town's operations. You don't have the authority under state law to specifically say, if you change a budget that's been proposed to you, you don't have the ability to say, we're going to increase it by X for a specific purpose or decrease it by Y for a specific purpose. You have the authority to increase it or decrease it as you see fit. And then the select board has the responsibility to manage within the amount of funds that you've authorized. And so often what happens and what might happen, depending on how things go a week from Saturday, is that there's sort of implied intent from discussions that occur at representative town meeting and decisions that are made there. But in fact, the final bottom line answer to the question you've raised is the select board that will be seated on March 25th would make the ultimate decision about what adjustments are made going forward in the implementation of the decisions that you make on March 23rd.
Stuart Agave, District 3. I'm enormously impressed by a 25-year capital plan. I never thought I would see the day. Quite impressive. I am having a little trouble reading it. I don't understand it. The bottom line on the 25-year plan doesn't correspond to the same as the 5 years in the book. And I'm just wondering whether what you have here is what it would look like if we had a plan like this all along?
It's two separate things. So you'll recall that a few years back we separated, instead of just having a transfer to capital, we do a transfer for capital equipment and we do a separate transfer for capital projects. That was very intentional because we knew that as we improved our work in these areas, that we would make progress faster in being very intentional and thorough and transparent about what's going to happen in the future with replacement of equipment, because it's just much clearer about life cycles for equipment and expectation for when we're going to have to spend that money. The projects plan is much more difficult to forecast really frankly, both short-term and long-term, while we're still catching up to infrastructure needs. As we get more and more on top of the condition of our infrastructure, we'll be better at forecasting the project, but we won't ever be able to look you in the eye and show a 25-year plan with a level of confidence for projects that we have in what you've received related to equipment. So the two are in very different places right now. We have a very high level of confidence, and we look forward to having more discussion. It doesn't really directly affect the decisions you're making this year, but it'll start to have importance next year and very much so in the years beyond that. We look forward to having those conversations around the content of the 25-year equipment plan and why that type of planning in an area where we can be more certain is so important for us. But the big asterisk on that is over on the project side, we're still in a mode where we're looking a few years at a time at doing the most urgent things to keep up with our needs. And as we get continuing to make progress on that, we'll be able to look a little further ahead and have a better plan for projects. But it won't ever be a 25-year capital plan for both types.
Does anyone else have any questions about anything else on the town meeting warrant? Yeah.
Hi, good evening. My name is Judy Guerrero, first time rep. And excuse my ignorance here, but I keep going back to the $5 million that town has invested as a pure interest rate value. But the question I had was, has the town also given any consideration in terms of how the money, or once invested, where the money is invested? So to be, as responsible town, for us to be aware of socially responsible investments, and does the investment meet our morals and values of the town we hold dear?
We don't know where it's invested by the savings and loan. Our investment decision was to place the funds in an account at the savings and loan, but we'll make an inquiry about that. It's the second time it's been asked this evening, and we'll find out what we can about how that particular, they offer different types of accounts, and I'm not sure what they'll be able to tell us about how that particular pot of funds, where our $5 million is in with lots of other people's money, but to the degree that they can compartmentalize that piece and tell us how they invest those funds, we'll give you an answer between now and the 23rd.
I have something that I could use to clarify. I worked there for most of my life, I think, before going to human services. So the money is in a money market account, but a bank money market account is not like a money market account that you're putting with your 401k. It's FDIC insured. It's basically under the heading of a checking account, but you're not allowed to just use it willy-nilly with a debit card. There's a federal amount of transactions you can use through it. And the money that is invested in accounts such as checking and savings accounts at Brattleboro Savings and Loan does not go out into other investments, if that helps at all. So it's, when you're thinking of it, don't think of it as a money market account that's going into the investment market that you're watching the rates go on. It's literally just a checking account that pays a higher rate of interest and has a federally regulated amount of transactions that come through it. You're welcome.
Sure. I am right, am I not, that Brattleboro Savings and Loan is a local bank?
That's correct. Yep.
So we're not investing our money in...
Over 100 years.
Wells Fargo.
Yeah.
Andy Eames, District 2.
And you're a new town rep.
I'm also a new town rep. So I just had a question on capital equipment, vehicles and equipment. If we assume the same rate of resale value as the firearms that were described, so these are $1,000 new firearms that are old versions are being sold for $150 a piece roughly. One, is there, for all of this equipment, is there someone in charge of resale that could maximize the value that we're getting? I mean, 10% resale value seems, relatively low? And also, are there documented faults with all of this equipment, or is this regularly scheduled maintenance that we're screening for? Or, you know, are the police department's pistols actually jamming out there? That's all.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
I'm wondering if there are documented issues with the equipment that's being considered to be replaced.
Yep. Yes, so it's actually a combination in terms of the planned scheduled replacement versus replacement for something that's simply worn out. There's a combination of things going on here. If you have a question about any of the specific items, there are department heads who can speak more explicitly to those particular items than I can. What I can tell you is, while the 10% recovery may be disappointing for the weapons, it's actually not uncommon for us to get less than that back because we try to use things up pretty thoroughly. So the exception to that would be pieces of equipment that we see beginning to require more maintenance, where we expect that very significant increases in the cost of maintenance for a larger piece of equipment like the dump trucks, for instance, where we expect that that's going to cost us maybe tens of thousands of dollars to keep on the road in the near future, and it's coming to the end of a scheduled expected useful life. We'll go ahead and trade that in and get a better value on it before it starts to be all used up.
Thank you.
Sure.
Does anyone else have any questions about things? Yes, come on up.
Andrews, District 2. I had a question regarding the climate change. I thought this was a place to address it. I was particularly interested in the activists' nature and what they've learned experiencing with the public and how their efforts come across. Like, what does it take to alert a person on the street how drastic the need is to do something about the environment? What are your experiences with talking with people on how to effectively address the drastic measures we need to enforce?
And that's a good question for town meeting.
Not here. I apologize.
That's okay. Now they're on. Yeah, now they're on notice.
I'm residing in District 2, and what is a price quote for an alternative to road salt that is currently being used? I know that $100,000 or over that is being spent on the road salt being used now, and that is an environmental hazard, and also by environmental, like also our dogs are being covered in it, and that's toxic when they lick it off.
So Steve Barrett is here and could speak to the details of this better than I can. I can tell you that in general, there's actually a variety of different products that are all under the heading of salt and all purchased from that line item. And different materials are used for different types of storms. And there's been a lot of advancements in recent years because of environmental laws that we have to comply with, as well as just best practices. There are, for road crews, whether it's state road crews or municipal road crews, you know, all across the country in areas where we get snowy and icy winters, significant advancements in materials that can be used. I'm not going to suggest that they are harmless, but
Why not? Why doesn't just only use harmless?
What I am going to suggest is that there's a lot of mindfulness being paid to using materials that are not excessive for the purpose, particularly given the type of storm we're having. So, for instance, unfortunately, we're using more salt and less sand in a winter like we're having this year with a lot of ice than we would be in a winter where we have a lot of snow and less ice. If you'd like to go deeper into the topic, I'm going to need to defer to Steve.
Who is Steve?
He's the Public Works Director.
He's right behind you.
Are you going to come on the seat?
Steve Barrett, Director of Public Works. Over the years, we have actually reduced the amount of salt that the town of Brattleboro uses. We have a calibration system to ensure that we're not using X number of pounds per mile lane. That's how they measure salt. We use much less than what is recommended. The other thing is we have experimented with alcohol. There's actually a brine that's used from the breweries that we've added with salt to decrease the amount of salt that's used, but actually to use in alcohol. So there are different things in the toolbox, but that all comes down to a cost. You know, we're conscientious about the environment, but those are some of the things that we've tried.
Okay, so Steve, so you're saying, you make the budget for the salt, right?
Each year I make a recommendation for the budget and then it's passed by this body.
Can you offer a budget that is non-toxic? I know you can, but will you commit to that?
That can be into consideration for next year's budget.
This budget's already drafted, that's what we're looking at.
Will you for next year?
We'll do its best.
I'm sure the town will investigate alternatives versus salt, and we can look at that next year, sure.
See, I want non-toxic to not be an alternative, but then make the only choice.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about any articles on the warrant?
Hi, my name is Gaia. I just saw under Article 20 that there was proposed $10,000 to be added to the budget for sustainability and energy efficiency measures. And I was wondering if there was anywhere in the budgets from years past or for this coming year that outline pre-existing initiatives directed at those fields for sustainability and energy efficiency to the degree that the capital fund outlines demands and proposed budgets for police defense equipment. Is there that level of detail in regards to energy efficiency and sustainability initiatives?
We have a $2 million energy efficiency plan. That's not this budget. No. And you're not talking about the $10,000, are you?
Yeah,
I thought you wanted to know in general what the town does for sustainability. You're just talking about those 10,000.
No, the 10,000 is listed as being specifically for sustainability and energy efficiency measures for the discretion of the select board, and I was wondering if there was any other money in the budget that was allocated for those initiatives already.
Yeah, I mean, there is, and we had, how many years ago, a couple years ago, there was an energy expert who came in and did an assessment of all town buildings, and we put $2 million into capital projects to fix, whether it's the windows in the Gibson Center, or, a new boiler for the First Memorial Library, and that's just an ongoing plan, so the town has made quite an investment.
Yeah, amazing. Is there a place where all of that information is accessible and
Yeah, you'll want to look at the energy audit that was completed to be able to actually see the recommendations there, and then we'd be happy to provide you, there was a report we did for the select board looking at this question sometime last summer, I don't remember exactly when, but that would give you the update about what's been implemented from that and what still remains to be implemented.
Okay.
From it. We'd be happy to provide all of that to you.
Yeah, is that available on the town's website?
It probably is. I can't tell you with pinpoint accuracy where to go for it. So if you want to be in touch with us at the town manager's office tomorrow, we'll make sure that you get what you're looking for.
For sure, I'm very curious, and I'm also interested, is there any, am I interested? Oh. I am interested.
You get actually closer and you won't have to turn it up.
It's a sound system.
Get closer.
Get closer. Is there anywhere in the budget for this year that outlines money that will be specifically put towards those kinds of initiatives? Like in the budget that is in that book?
This year, there are no new expenses towards that set of projects. We have completed some of the major stuff. The remaining major ones, there are minor things that are done, like for instance, the windows that get replaced at the children's room will be replaced with a better quality, more energy efficient window, just as the very large ones down in the main room were this past year. So we'll make some marginal improvement there, but that's not strictly speaking an energy efficiency project. It's a required maintenance project.
Right.
The remaining very large opportunities from the recommendations in the energy audit are at facilities where we expect to be making very significant capital improvements in the foreseeable future. And so we have deferred implementing the energy efficiency pieces there, expecting to include those instead in a larger project that will upgrade those facilities. And we can again go over the details of that in looking at what was originally recommended 3 years ago and what progress has been made and which projects have been identified as those to be completed, in the future as opposed to in this budget. Or
That's great to hear. I was just the wording of the article and the specific amount of $10,000 for sustainability and energy efficiency initiatives that really stuck out to me, and I was curious to see like the total number that the town was devoting to those kinds of initiatives, given their importance.
So I'd like to actually speak to the 10,000, and what I'm about to say is going to be really old news to lots of folks in the room, but for the new members or anybody else who hasn't followed this, the $10,000 is really something quite different from the town's overall investment in being smarter about climate issues and more energy efficient in our buildings. The $10,000 was first appeared, I think, about a decade ago. There are people in the room who will know that deeper history better than I. As an action of town meeting to support the Energy Committee's work, by having there be some money available for the energy coordinator, who was a volunteer, to have a small stipend and some money that was available to do some outreach into the community and some other types of things with. So over the years, there were year after year there was $10,000 as an article on this warning for this body to consider whether or not to keep investing in that work. The last couple of years, unfortunately, it's been a little more up and down in terms of the work of the Energy Committee and the work of the Energy Coordinator, which has been a position that hasn't been consistently filled. So there was a long period of time when it was a relatively consistent thing, and it was every year there was sometimes some debate, sometimes not, and it was always approved for the $10,000. Last year, there was quite a long debate about the $10,000, and it was approved, but there was concern expressed by the body about the lack of specificity about exactly how that money would be used. And that's why this year, the board decided that we didn't want to take the $10,000 question all the way off the table, but the board suggested that instead it should be on as its own separate decision for town meeting, but not a part of the budget, because we don't have a specific plan for how that money would be spent.
So is there a proposal that will be presented at the representative town meeting for those funds?
There might be, but it's not on the agenda. But what has happened in the last couple of years is that there's been conversation about expanding beyond just looking at energy and looking at the whole realm of what sustainability for community needs and means. And there are lots of models, and there are lots of towns that have adopted various programs at different accomplishments and successes. And there's a group of people who are looking into gathering information to help inform the conversation that will happen this summer about whether to have a sustainability coordinator. And we didn't want to put it on the budget this year because we didn't really know what it was going to be about. But I'm certain that a lot of that information will come out of the town meeting when the summer comes out.
Great. Just so everyone here knows, I helped write one of the articles on the warning, the Article 25, I believe. So if anyone has any questions about that, I would happily answer them. But not now. No, they're about the article, and it wouldn't be any advocacy. It would just be purely to answer any questions.
Does anyone else have any questions on it? Yes.
Hi, Andrew Marcia, District 3. I have a question about the mechanics of voting. This isn't the appropriate time. I'm happy to have my question answered at some other time. But
We'll yell at you if you're.
okay, yeah. Make me feel very ashamed. So I hear a lot of questions and possibly some strong concerns about aspects of the budget. And I guess I just wanted to confirm or deny an impression that I had that the articles we're voting on them up or down, right? We're not, okay, so amendments are possible? Or
Yes.
Good to know.
It will be robust.
And will we get a tutorial on how to do that?
We have, I can remind everybody right now that town meeting is Saturday, March 23rd. We actually begin at 8:30, but there's a tutorial on town meeting starting at 8 a.m. And town meeting this year is at the UHS auditorium, gym, I'm sorry. We usually do it at the multi-purpose room, but this year it's going to be at the high school gym. So if you get there at 8, and we have a moderator, who's Lauren Chris, but I know who's here, and so Gil will actually have somebody, it won't be us, it'll be somebody else who moderates the discussion and keeps it on track, and people are patient. We don't get yelled at too much.
So just a quick follow-up over maybe to August.
I was just going to advocate for, it's incredibly helpful, I think, to go back to VCTV and watch last year's or the year before or whatever, because you really get a sense for how it goes. And short of like studying Robert's rules, you really don't need to, because our moderator does a great job sort of walking everybody through that process. But go back and watch last year's town meeting. I mean,
All 9 hours.
all 9 hours. Clear your day.
Just one follow-up question. That's all right. So line item changes to the budget are possible or no? Okay, that was my question. Thank you.
Those were good questions. Anyone else? Kurt? Oh, no. Is it Kurt? Oh, no, I'm sorry, Andy. Kurt's, it looks like Kurt's arm is coming out.
We have the same arm.
You're welcome.
Is it okay for me to just mention, sort of emphasize the meeting next Wednesday that sort of says in the handouts is not happening? So if people read carefully what you received coming in tonight, you might go, oh, that's not happening this year. And for new people, and it took me a while to wrap my brain around this, and we changed it a few years ago. If you were elected at the election on March 5th, you do not get sworn in until after this representative town meeting. So we have new members who will be joining the select board, new members joining the school board, but we're not on the board yet, okay? But next, the situation with the schools, if you're paying attention, is changing. The Senate has taken it up this week, and next meeting, there will be an information meeting. It was voted on by the town school board last week, or a week ago, to hold that meeting, which had been not on the schedule, but it will be held, and it was a headline in the paper that a budget has been prepared. I believe Mr. Scholes mentioned a kind of two-track approach. So that'll be a really good opportunity to try to clarify what's going on right now and the challenges facing us with regard to that. So I just wanted to say that and make an appeal for people to come to Green Street School. I can't remember, the meeting starts at what time, David?
Good question, I believe 5 o'clock, but I'm not sure.
We have 6:30.
6:30 p.m., a week from tonight at Green Street School.
Hillary's got it.
Hillary! So caucuses start at 6 p.m. The meeting starts at 6:30 at the gym, Green Street School. Barb Nowakowski is, I believe this morning, mailed out notices to all town meeting members, letting you know the change in that does exist, because the information that I know about said that that meeting was not happening, and that's changed since. So you should all be getting a notice in the mail in the next few days.
Thank you.
Interestingly, the school board hasn't received that notice yet. if you want, I highly, save me an email and save yourself reading one. The finance committee prepared a report about the town school budget, and in there is a pretty good, very good description of what's going on, why it's going on, and what the various moving parts are. And we'll do a lot more of that on Wednesday night, but if you read that, you'll come in well prepared for the conversation.
Where do we find that, David?
You all received that with your town report. The finance committee's recommendation, there's 3 separate finance committee reports, and they're all in the town report. It's not, they're not part of the town report, they were handed out with the town report.
It's also available on the town website in the finance section.
I must admit, I'm a bit alarmed at the manner in which you, Madam Chairwoman, have seemed to try to divert attention from people who want to discuss the environmental issues. And I would remind everyone at this body that this occasion here is for the discussion of any article on the agenda for the 23rd. Isn't that right?
Yeah, we said that.
Yeah.
And what we're asking is not to have debates on issues, or have safe debates to the floor and see.
Now let people speak once before you declare them not to debate things. There was a question earlier, you dismissed it and told the lady this wasn't the right place. So I have a question for Mr. Eames, who is the new rep. If he anticipates is it proper to ask a question to him?
Well,
If Mr. Eames expects that the resolution as written, what effect you expect it might have on the budget?
What resolution are you talking about?
Article number 25,
what I would ask, and if this body wants to overrule me, I would just ask that it's not an answer that is advocating for a position.
Factually.
We're trying not to get into that, we're trying to save it for the town meeting.
If you're advising me not to respond, I have no choice but to respect that.
No, I mean, if you have a definite number or not number, the question was, do you know how much of an impact it will have on the budget?
I'm sorry, Kurt, at this time I don't have that exact number, but I expect it will affect town finances in some
Could you
measure.
speak up? I can't hear you in the back. Could you use the microphone? I'm really hard of hearing back here. Thank you.
Sure. Andy Eames, District 2, and I'm a proponent of the article that Kurt mentioned. I don't know the exact numbers, but I expect there will be some financial rewards available to the town via implementation of common sense actions that we can all take in whether town offices or our own homes to conserve energy. Furthermore, it seems like the study that was done and the changes that are being made to town buildings and offices are well and good and in the right vein of, we're on the right track, but essentially there are a litany of smaller changes that can be done by each and every one of us ourselves that come far before water pipes and windows, common sense things, and I think that's what Kurt's getting at. But the town has an opportunity to gain a lot through keeping our eyes open to this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hi, I'm Review Zaddy from 6-2, and I am curious because there have been no financial records listed on the town website regarding the public funds trustees about how their money is being spent, or how the public funds are being spent. Why is it that they are using the private Edwards Bank instead of the Brattleboro Savings and Loans, where the rest of the community money is being exchanged and saved there, and what the interest rate different options are? What did Edward Jones offer them for their accounts
for the accounts versus what Brattleboro savings and loans?
That is not, item for tonight's meeting, but the, trustees of the public funds is gonna be having a meeting soon. We don't know what that date is, but they are gonna have a meeting.
Will it be put on the town calendar?
Yes, yes, as soon as it's firmly scheduled, I don't know if it's been firmly scheduled or just tentatively scheduled, but when it's firmly scheduled, it'll be on the town calendar. And just a quick FYI to everybody for context, because it's not part of what's being discussed tonight or on the 23rd, but the trustees of public funds are responsible for the oversight of funds that have been donated to the town. So it's an important role, but it's a very small subset of town finances as compared to the
I think they're
variety of
dealing with
issues
about over
discussed.
$200,000. So,
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions about any warrant
so
items?
when you say firmly scheduled, do you mean like officially, like what is the minimum amount of warning time the public has so that they can see in advance that when the meeting is scheduled for?
I believe it's 48 hours, looking down at Bob, sure, yeah, 48 hours, but what we usually do, almost always, except when there's extenuating circumstances, is Friday, all the meetings for the following week are warned. So when this meeting has been firmly scheduled, it'll be warned to the public, likely on a Friday to be held the following week.
With like a necessary 48 hours time?
The minimum is 48 hours.
Well, no, it's actually 24 hours, sorry.
Sorry, minimum is 24 hours.
We do it on Fridays.
Does anyone else have any other questions dealing with any of the articles on town meeting?
Hi, Sonia Silver, District 3. I have a question about Article 20 and your explanation about it. Did you mean to imply that you probably would not be replacing the energy coordinator this year and that you'd use the funds for something else? Or did you not mean to imply that?
I didn't mean to imply that it wouldn't happen. I meant to indicate that it's not explicitly or solely for that purpose, and that's why it's been worded to be for energy efficiency purposes to be used at the discretion of the board. The board could decide to commit that to an energy coordinator in the manner that it has been done in the past.
Thank you. Christina Andrews, District 2. I thought I heard you mention the energy coordinator position was volunteer. Did I hear you incorrectly? So that appropriation would not then be delegated toward that position, or it could pertain?
It could be. Because in the past, the energy coordinator has been the recipient of the $10,000 to either use for paying themselves or for other projects.
Okay. So when you said volunteer, that's just at the status now?
That is correct.
And that's to be further determined by the select board's discussion?
Correct.
And that person is.
That's right.
Thank you.
Got it. Does anyone else have any questions about anything that's on the town meeting warrant? And then before everybody leaves, I just want to do one more reminder of the school meeting on March 20th. Before that, Hillary mentioned at 6 o'clock there are going to be caucuses, because we still need 4 representatives for District 1, 2 representatives for District 3, so we have friends, family, and colleagues who can tell how great it is to be at town meeting, that can come. And just a reminder, town meeting is March 23rd, UHS Gymnasium, 8:30 we start, 8 o'clock we return for that town meeting. So thank you everybody for coming. Oh, Hillary has something.
I just want to add to that. Just a reminder, as you are talking to your friends and family and colleagues, at the information session on the 20th for the school, as well as representing the town meeting, there is free childcare available.
Oh.